So here we are in Microsoft Flight Simulator at the default City Aerodrome Manchester, otherwise known as Barton Aerodrome, or Echo Golf Charlie Bravo if you want the ICAO code for it, to check out a new release from prolific scenery developer Orbx, who you will be familiar with, particularly if you use FSX P3D or X-Plane. They've done tons of scenery for that, and certainly some scenery for the new Microsoft Flight Simulator, but this is their first stab as a developer with their own aeroplane, and this, which you see before you, is the Edgley EA-7 Optica. Now, interestingly, this was initially released in a much simpler form as a freeware aeroplane. It was available on flightsim.to, but Orbx decided to soup it up a little bit and make it a payware aeroplane. So that's what you see before you. Now, as far as the product is concerned, if you've never bought anything from Orbx, I'll put a link to them in the description below this video. But how their stuff installs is when you go to the website and buy something off them, they have their own little sort of like download and installation utility, which is great, makes installing things really easy, makes updating them really easy as well. So when you buy this thing, you use that little utility and it installs it nice and easily into the community folder of Microsoft Flight Simulator. It will mean that patching it is a very easy procedure, and you'll be able to see whether the thing needs an update and all that kind of stuff. So that's great. I paid, I think it was £13 sterling for this. So obviously equivalent prices for whatever currency you are dealing in. And as I say, it was a fairly small download, so it came down the pipe pretty quickly and installed very easily. Now, for your payment, what you end up with is the EA-7 Optica that you see in front of you, and I think you get, it might be 7 liveries with the thing, and you also get 2 PDFs with it. One of them is a few pages, and that is all of the checklists and what have you, and they are very nicely produced so that you could print them out on an A4 printer and laminate them and what have you and have a nice set of checklists. And there is also a main manual, which is, with this being a fairly simple aeroplane, is not particularly big. I think it's 23 pages, but has a little bit of a potted history on the aeroplane and tells you all about it and tells you how to install it and all that sort of thing. So manual-wise, this is really good. And as you can see, whether or not you're familiar with this aeroplane or not, but you will be by the end of this review, as you can see that this is a very, very nice model, and it compares very favourably with the real thing. Some people love the looks of this thing, some people think it's the fuggliest thing ever to have wings, but whatever your opinion on that, this looks a lot like the real thing. If we go on to a drone camera view that I've set up, you can see that it is very, very nicely detailed. What we're looking at there is the engine cowling and into the ducted area where the 5-bladed ducted fan propeller is located, and that's one of the things that makes this a very, very quiet aeroplane, because you've got that big circular shroud around the propeller. Obviously, with that and the airflow, you can see that there are a lot of louvers popped into the engine cowlings on the thing. But you can see from this that it is very, very nicely detailed, with all the sort of rivets picked out on the fuselage and a good polygon count for the thing as well. If you can just about make out the polygons on the curve there, but you have to come in real close to be able to see that. So it is a very, very nice model on the exterior. Now, when you get on the inside, then the nice looks continue. So let's take a look on the inside of the thing. Now, you can see that I've got both doors open on there, and you can see that those things close pretty easily by simply clicking on that thing there. And we've got sounds for when the door's shut, and you can see that the modelling on the interior is similarly nice. Good polygon count on the thing, considering how many curves are on the thing. Good texturing. If we look at the seats and the sort of the material that's on this parcel shelf at the back and things like that, it's all very, very nicely detailed. And note that there is something which is very, very interesting with this. If we go back on the external view, considering the amount of glass that there is on the cockpit, you are not noticing any sort of graphics artifacting on there. No problem with the transparencies of the thing at all. So full marks on that score. Now, the Edgley Optica, we'll talk a little bit more about the real aeroplane when we get the thing in the air, but it's a fairly simple aeroplane. It was designed originally to be an alternative to a helicopter, which would be cheaper to operate. So it was intended to be cheaper to operate with a relatively slow flying speed and good visibility for use as a surveillance aeroplane. It's got a 270-degree field of view on the thing. So very, very reminiscent of helicopters such as the Alouette and the Bell 47 and the Hughes MD 500, but with much cheaper operating costs, which is why a few police forces used it for surveillance and stuff like that. And it's very quiet as well, which is another plus point of it, surveillance-wise. Now, so let's have a look at what we've got here. So you've got left and right fuel tank selector on there, and you will have to manually switch that over when you are in flight. And on the subject of the fuel load on there, I'm going to point something out here that's probably worth bearing in mind if you're going to check this thing out. You can see left and right main fuel tanks, which equates to that, but you'll notice that what I have done is I've got a pilot that weighs 170 pounds, but what I've also done is I've put a passenger that weighs 170 pounds who would be in that seat on the far side, and that balances the thing up well. So if you're flying this thing and you're finding it sort of turning to the left a bit, try popping a passenger in that seat there, and that will balance things up a little bit. Interesting thing about the Edgley EA-7 Optica is pilot flies from the left-hand seat, co-pilot flies from the middle seat, and the passenger is over on the right-hand seat, and that's so that they can observe out of the window and shoot photographs and stuff like that. So back on the controls, left and right fuel tank selector, as we've seen, flap selector there, 3 stages of flaps on this thing, down to a maximum of 50 degrees of flaps, which is one of the things that enables it to land fairly slowly. You have a trim wheel on there, and you will probably have to trim this sort of nose up a little bit. So I'm going to roll the trim wheel there a little bit, and then we've got a little bit of nose up trim on there. We'll see why we need that when we get in the air. You've got the brake lever on there. If you click on that, that will release the parking brakes. I'm not going to do that just yet. You've got a throttle lever there, which I will crack open slightly, so because we're going to be starting the thing. You've got a mixture control there, which I will put fully forward because we are going to start the thing. There is a friction lever there, that obviously on the real aeroplane stops the throttle closing from engine vibrations, but doesn't do much on the sim. And in front of that, you've got the fuel shutoff valves for the left and right fuel tanks. I'm not sure that they actually do much in the sim, but you know, we'll turn them on anyway. And then we're on to the control binnacle here, which is very, very similar to what you find in helicopters, and that is so that you've got a good view down through those chin windows in a manner similar to a helicopter. So the instruments are not massively complex, but fairly comprehensive for the thing. So we've got 2 fuel gauges on there, which you can see good reflections on the gauges and all this, and very nicely detailed they are too. You've got an oil pressure gauge there. You've got an RPM gauge there with the red line at 2,700 RPM. You've got an oil temperature gauge there, and then you've got this big sort of combination gauge here, which has amps there, cylinder head temperature there, which is important, or exhaust gas temperature there, which is also important because you've got a ducted fan, so you've got to watch the temperature sometimes, and then you've got a voltmeter there, and as I say, above that there is an oil temperature gauge. Then excuse me, moving up, we've got a typical 6-pack. So you've got an airspeed indicator. Notice the red line there for your stall speed to watch out for. This thing will cruise at about 110 knots. You can probably get a little bit more out of it, and you can see it's got a VNE of 140 knots. Good luck getting this up to 140 knots. You'll probably need to be in a dive to do that. Turn and slip indicator there. Directional gyro, DI or whatever, HSI, whatever you want to call it. Vertical speed indicator for climb and dive. There is a carbon monoxide detector there, which obviously isn't going to do much in the sim, but will be important on the real thing. Artificial horizon, which we can see we've got no power, so that's toppled at the moment. And then an altimeter. This thing has a service ceiling of just over 14,000 feet. So not the world's highest flying aeroplane. We've got a transponder there. We've got a GPS there, and then we've got some switches for the audio on there. And then up above that, we've got a little control panel with fuel pump, pitot heat, navigation lights, strobe lights, landing lights, taxi lights, and the panel lights, which are not lighting up because we haven't got any power applied. You've got a non-functioning switch there, which can select the different audio modes on there. You don't need to worry about that. It's the only non-functioning switch in the cockpit. And then what we've got is we can apply external power if you want, but it won't actually sort of visually put a GPU on the thing, but it will start powering the thing up. You can see that as the gyro is spinning up, and you can see that the GPS is on, but the transponder you have to manually turn on with that little switch there, which you can see can be a little bit tricky to get to because it's kind of getting that switch is kind of in the way. But obviously, if you go on things like VATSIM and stuff like that, it is kind of important to be able to put a transponder code in. So you'll notice that you can do that. Then what we've got is so I've put that external power supply on, so you can see a few lights on the panel there, and we can put the battery on. There is a low voltage warning light there if your battery is running out of power, and then there is an alternator switch there, and that's where the start switch is there. Note that there is a little key up there for the magnetos that you can start the engine with as well. You've got a little clock there, and then you've got these things with sort of like warning for your ballast and stuff like that. There is a whiskey compass up there, and then the only other thing that doesn't actually do much in the sim but would be important in the real airplane is you've got a fire extinguisher there, and you've got 2 air vents, because this thing has a big glass greenhouse cockpit. So on the real thing you've got the sun beating down on you and no green top windows like you have in a typical helicopter, so those air vents would be fairly important. I'm not sure whether you could fly this thing with the doors off. Probably not. But you know, and you're certainly not going to be able to fly it with the doors open, so those vents would be fairly important. Now, fairly quiet in the cockpit, as is the case with the real thing, because you've got a big ducted fan. But if we want to hear this thing from the outside, it's noted for not being a particularly noisy aeroplane, which was because of its design intended to be a surveillance aeroplane. So if we go on the external view, you can see, or rather hear, that it's not particularly loud. And if we throttle the thing up, it has a very sort of weird wasp buzz sound on it and what have you, which is very, very similar to the real aeroplane, because the real aeroplane, the shroud around the ducted fan, which is a 5-bladed propeller on the engine, blocks off a lot of the sound. And you can notice from this thing, it's got quite a few antennas on it, which sort of betray its intent at being a surveillance aeroplane. Elevator is up on the big twin tail boom, twin rudders on the thing, ailerons on both wingtips obviously, and then 3 stages of flaps. And if we have a look at the flaps, if I pop the flaps down all the way, you can see one of the reasons why this is a low and slow surveillance aeroplane. You've got a big curved wing profile on there, and then you've got flaps which come a long way back and add a lot to the curve of the thing, and you've also got vortex generators on the outer parts of the wings. So this thing is designed to sort of not have nasty stall characteristics and be able to come in fairly slow on there. I'll pop those flaps back up for the moment. And we'll have a look at the thing back in the cockpit in a moment. But as you can see, very, very nice airplane, and good sounds on the thing. The engine on the real thing is a Lycoming 540, which is 260 horsepower. And the original prototype of this, the first one, had a Lycoming 320, which was only 160 horsepower, which they determined was not powerful enough for this thing. So the production models have a 540 of 260 horsepower. They only ever built 22 of these things, and 10 of them were destroyed in an arson attack on the factory where they were building them. So there aren't actually many of these things in existence. You do see them flying about in the UK, where they were produced quite a bit, and sometimes around Europe, but in other places around the world, they're going to be a fairly rare sight. Anyway, let's take this thing for a bit of a flight. So here we are in the cockpit, and we'll release the parking brake, like that, and away we go. So I will pull the view out a little bit so that you can see the rudder pedals, and we'll give it a bit of power. And you'll notice another thing about the EA-7 Optica: you're very low down to the ground. So it sort of conveys quite a sense of speed, a bit like when you're in a sports car and you're quite low down to the ground. But it does manoeuvre quite well on the ground, which I will now demonstrate. There we go, full rudder that way and full rudder that way. So that's nice if you happen to land it in quite a small field. So, you know, potentially quite good fun as a bit of a bush plane, if you like. I'll get this lined up for 26 right at Barton. It's not got the world's shortest takeoff run, as we will see. But you can get it down and up out of fairly small fields. So, you know, potentially could be a reasonably okay bush flyer. And then I'll stick the brakes on, go on the external view. We'll give it one stage of flaps. And you will note that I trimmed the nose up a little bit. And you'll see that this thing has not got the world's fastest climb out angle, but I do recommend that you trim the nose up a little bit when this thing takes off, otherwise you'll be having to hold the stick back and trim it nose up when you go off the ground. So without further ado, let's go for a bit of a fly. Now, not a lot of rudder required to keep this thing straight, which is in keeping with the real thing, because you've got both of those rudders either side of the ducted fan, so you know, quite a lot of sort of directional stability on the thing. You can see there we're reaching flying speed, so we'll get the thing up, and up she goes quite nicely. And if I let go of the stick, there I am clapping my hands, so I'm not holding the stick. This thing, if with a little bit of nose up trim, will go into quite a nice climb. I'm going to get the flaps up on the thing like that, and then we'll go for a bit of a turn. This thing is not the world's most high-powered aeroplane, so don't be tempted to sort of throw it into really, really tight turns where you're hauling back on the stick unless you've got a bit of speed on the thing. However, one thing that you can do with this is, you know, if you do want to throw it about a bit for observation and looking out the side windows, what you can do is you can get the nose down a little bit, get a bit of speed on, and as you can see there, I'm watching the speed needle, and I'm getting the nose down, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rack it round in a bit of a tight turn, and you can see there that you can get it up on its wingtip. So as I say, not the fastest aeroplane in the world, but you know, providing you've got a bit of speed on, it is quite manoeuvrable. Now, if you throttle back quite a bit, you can have this thing fly pretty slowly. You may possibly have to trim the nose up a little bit to do that, or alternatively, what you could do is you could drop some flaps. But this thing will loiter at about 70 knots, which if you get it into a headwind, will mean that it's not going particularly fast over the ground, and it has at its lowest sort of loitering speeds, it has an 8-hour endurance, so that you can keep this thing up in the air for a long time, and it's great view wise. As you can see looking about there, there aren't many small aeroplanes with a view like this thing, which is you know, one of the intentions of the thing, that it was intended to be a surveillance aeroplane. Looks pretty good in the air. As I say, they only built 22 of these things, and 10 of them were destroyed in a factory fire, so they're pretty rare. But it did make a film appearance. If you check out the 1989 sci-fi film Slipstream, which stars Mark Hamill, Bill Paxton, Bob Peck, and has a soundtrack by Elmer Bernstein, so it's a pretty good fun film. If you check that out, there is an Edgley Optica which features very heavily in that film, and it has a really rather interesting paint scheme. It has a sort of three-tone grey sci-fi splinter camouflage paint scheme on it, which looks really rather cool. And it's just a bit unfortunate that you don't get that paint scheme in this add-on, but I dare say some repainter will have a stab at that, or at least we can hope so, because it's a very, very cool paint job. No problem being able to spot the airfield in this thing, because it's got a great view out of it. And frame rate wise, it's pretty good. If anyone's curious about the computer that I'm using here, I've got a Kaby Lake i5 processor. I've got an RX 480 ATI graphics card, which has 8 gigabytes of DDR5 memory on it, and I've got 44 gigabytes of I think it's DDR4 RAM on the motherboard. So not a particularly flashy computer, which is one of the nice things about Microsoft Flight Simulator, is that it runs pretty well on a low-speed computer. And I've got the graphics up pretty high, and I've got photogrammetry free add-on scenery for Manchester from flightsim.to on this thing. So if you're wondering why the scenery looks pretty good for Manchester and you want scenery similar to this, go to flightsim.to and type in Manchester and you'll be able to download this scenery. So this thing is great for exploring scenery. Notice that you have to keep an eye on the airspeed, because I am only about 3 knots above that red line on the airspeed indicator, but I have got full flaps on. This thing does pitch down quite a lot when you deploy the flaps, which is realistic. I am fully throttled back here, and this thing's coming in reasonably well. It can float a little bit when it gets in ground effect, but generally speaking, you can get this thing down in fairly small spots. But you can see that this thing comes in fairly nicely with it throttled back and on full flaps, and you just sort of overcook the flare a little bit there. Bit deceptive when you flare this, because you're actually quite low to the ground to actually touch down. But you can see that it lands quite nicely. And if you give it some brakes, which I am now doing, it can stop in fairly short order. So we'll get the flaps up and we'll taxi this thing back to where we started. And what I will do is I'll show you the exterior lights on the thing at night, because obviously it's not got massively complicated avionics, but it does have a GPS and it does have a transponder and it does have cockpit lighting and exterior lighting on it. So you could fly this in IMC if you wanted to, and you could do IFR flights in it, because it is intended to be an aeroplane for professional surveillance people like police forces and search and rescue and all that kind of stuff. So even though it's relatively simple, it's relatively well equipped for what it is, and flies nicely, very nicely in fact. So we'll get this thing back to where we started. See what I mean there? Like, we're actually going quite slow over the ground, but in the cockpit it looks like you're going pretty fast, and that's because you're really low to the ground. So if you think I was taxiing that thing really fast, it's a bit deceptive. Now, just before we shut the engine down, what I'll do is I'll put the parking brake on, and then what I will do is I'll come here and I'll make sure that all the lights are on the thing, and then what I'll do is I'll change the time in the sim to night time, so you can see what this thing looks like at night. I'll get that out of the way so you can see the landing lights illuminate the ground quite well. The cockpit has basic lighting, but then again, that is what you'd want on an aeroplane that you were using for observation, because you don't want a lot of glare on the interior of the cabin. And as I say, the glass on this thing is really well done. There's no sort of like visual artifacts when you look at it on the external view. So full marks to them for how they've done the glass. And if you actually look at the glass close up on an external view, there are sort of scuffs on it, but they've not overdone it. When we go on the external view, you can see that the night lighting is pretty good. The strobe lights are illuminating the ground. The wingtip navigation lights are really nice and bright on this thing, which I'm glad to see, because that's another thing that I really dislike on add-on aeroplanes, if the lights are a bit weedy. So what we'll do is we'll change the time of day back to daylight. That's another great thing about Microsoft Flight Simulator. It does that really quickly. And then what we'll do is we'll shut the thing down. So, mixture back, and then a relatively simple shutdown procedure on this, obviously turning everything off. And as I say, the PDFs have all the proper procedures for this thing, so you know, you don't have to worry about not knowing how the thing works. Alright, I do have to move down a little bit to be able to get to those switches on there. But you know, you can just about do it. And then what we would want to do is we want to knock that off and knock that off, and then up there, magneto's off on the thing. Notice that the clock still runs even when you've got all the electrics off, because that is correct. It is wired directly to the battery, because it's not particularly draining. Whiskey compass is a little bit difficult to see when you're zoomed out like that, but when you're at night, it actually illuminates pretty well. So, you know, if you like navigating off the whiskey compass, that can be a little bit tricky to see. But then again, you've got a GPS down there, so you're all right. So, boom. That was why that was still illuminated, because I didn't turn off the external power on there. But you know, it doesn't really matter that much. So, pretty simple, but pretty nice, and pretty good value at 13 quid. As I say, you may possibly have downloaded the freeware original version of this. This is considerably souped up over that one. And of course, the other thing is that now that this is a payware aircraft, you are kind of guaranteed that they're going to patch it and keep it updated if patches come out for Microsoft Flight Simulator. So if you're thinking, well, why would I buy it when I've got the freeware version? This thing is a lot nicer than the freeware version. Good texturing on it, good modeling, flies nicely, and all that sort of thing. And it is quite useful in the sim, because with an 8-hour endurance and a cruise speed of over 100 knots, you can go quite a long way in this thing, but you can land it in fairly small spots, get it out of fairly small spots. You can loiter for a long time, and short of something like that top rudder 103 little ultralight, or the Bell 47 or something like that in Microsoft Flight Simulator, it's hard to imagine something with a better view out of the cockpit. 270 degree field of view out of this thing. So you know, really pretty good for that. So there you go. Short and sweet, that one. For this episode on my channel. Speaking of which, if you like my videos and you want to keep up to date with and get notifications of when I release a new video, because I'm do them fairly thick and fast, then click that subscribe button. Don't forget to sort of put your comments in the comments section, and look out for me on all the sort of like regular flight sim haunts like AvSim, FlightSim.com, the Microsoft Flight Simulator forums and what have you. And beyond that, take care of yourselves,